Well, it's good to be on with Heidi Hollis again, and we've got a great guest in Russ Breault. He has the Shroud Encounter. It's all kinds of information on the Shroud of Turin, and Heidi, I'm really looking forward to this show.
Yeah, me too.
Well, it's a big topic, and of course, I'm not as familiar with the Shroud as I am the Tilma of Guadalupe that I've mentioned before, but which has been absolutely particles of it have been examined by Sandia Labs in, New Mexico. And there's no pigment, no tracing. It's as miraculous as you could get. And, that's really wild. I mean, we couldn't replicate it if we had a whole team of CIA specialists trying to replicate it. But anyhow, I'm assuming the Shroud has certain similar authenticities. But on a lighter note for the moment, now, I know this sounds strange, but then you live there so that you can speak with some authority.
Uh-oh.
Chicago is bedeviled with bat-like humanoids?
Yes, that's been going on for several months now. Well, actually, I think they've seen one like a couple years ago, even.
Yeah. Well, there's been a dozen sightings just in 2017.
Yeah, and right close to my place here, too. I live on the north side.
Says the most recent sighting occurred last month in Logan Square, wherever that is.
Very close to me, yeah.
A bouncer at the Owl, night spot, saw a bat-like humanoid flying over the lot across the street from the bar. And, who am I to say? It's...
It's crazy. And it's freaking people out.
I'll bet it is. Even I'm... not just crazy about bat-like creatures running about, but these kind of things have been reported many different places. And they had a semi-truck driver reported strange maladies after spotting a flying humanoid over a Chicago expressway in March of 2017. Mm-hmm. A witness walking their dog in Oz Park, wherever the hell that is, ran into a paralyzing winged being on April 10th. Now, of course, 3 separate witnesses saw an identified flying humanoid over Chicago between April 15th and 16th. And just one more, a man fishing with his son on the banks of the Little Calumet River, in Chicago, sees a weird winged being after hearing an eerie, unexplained sound just as recently as April 27th.
Oh, yeah, they describe it sounding like a train coming to a screeching stop.
Yeah, it seems like it's pretty well. And one more. A family walking along the riverfront sees a flying humanoid cross over the William Fahey Bridge within a week of the May 5th sighting. It's just happened a lot. Yeah. And by some credible people. families and stuff, not just drunks hanging around a bar and stuff.
Well, I think I need to get on the tail of this. I should, anybody's seen this stuff, I think they should send me the reports. Just honestly, go to HeidiHollis.com because... it has like reflective eyes. Some have reported kind of red eyes. I'm like, this is interesting. It's Mothman. It's essentially Mothman. So
it sounds like
hey,
it is.
I live right here. Why not? And Mothman always predicts horrible things to come. So my goodness, there's always horrible things going on here in Chicago with all the shootings. Don't tell me something worse, like a terrorist act or something, or an earthquake, or I don't know, like.
Actually, Heidi, I've got one more that happened very recently. A police officer, along with the officer's partner, a group of civilians, saw a dark black shadow with wings standing atop a building before taking flight in the Auburn-Gresham neighborhood of Chicago just on June 29th.
And one report said that they saw 2 of them flapping together. That's even more horrifying.
I guess they got to have buddies. But no, Heidi, that's just a few days ago.
Yeah.
So, this is...
it's picking up.
Chicago is kind of a colorful place.
Well, this is Gotham City for the Batman movie, so it's kind of appropriate. Maybe it's some kind of a PR campaign.
I don't know, but a police officer's not going to say this just kind of willy-nilly because, they have their reputations. If somebody thinks there's a schizophrenics, they're not going to, might give them the boot,
Their reputation sucks here in Chicago anyhow, but yeah.
Maybe seeing winged figures would be the best thing that could happen. But I don't know, but now luckily there haven't been any murders this week by policemen that I know of. But I mean, I don't know what the upshot has been from the one we talked about in Minneapolis. I know that's still an issue, but there was a billboard, and I won't get into all the particulars because it said 1, 2, 3, or 4, but it was in Indiana, and it was on the Prophet Muhammad. And it said, yeah, he's a pedophile, and he killed 600 Jews in an hour, and did this and that. I mean, all kinds of grotesque things, but true things. And now the Muslims have their panties in a wad over it because they put the billboard up. In other words, to say they're holding this individual out as being a model man, and yet he's a brutal murderer and sadist and all that, pedophile and everything else. And they got their panties in a wad because they think it's anti-Muslim. I mean, no one doubts he did that. It's historically chronicled. But at any rate, God forbid you should criticize the Muslims. But at any rate, that came up.
Yeah.
And, other than that, I can tell the folks we're getting very big ratings, and it's really quite alarming, really, in a positive sense.
It's going well.
It really is crazy well. And, I mean, in a certain sense, okay, we don't have 600 affiliates like Coast to Coast does, but if we did, I think we'd beat them pretty soundly.
Yeah, it does sound that way.
Oh, we beat them into the earth. Are you kidding?
Hitting pretty close to 1 million people. It's crazy stuff.
I know, but I mean, that's without 600 affiliates. I mean, it took 20 years to accumulate that between Art Bell and all that. I mean, that was like mining in a coal mine for many years. But anyway, I guess we have a good show, Heidi.
I think we do. Somehow it's happened.
And we're coming up on the break, not quite, but I just want to say the next couple shows, we got August 1st, we got Paul Eno, and he's written a new book, and we'll highlight that. I don't have all the particulars right this minute.
Nice.
And then we have something that's kind of near and dear to me the following week on August 8th, and it's a show on the Bermuda Triangle.
Nice.
And since I split my time growing up between the Northeast and Florida, so I did spend a lot of Florida time, and of course I lived right in the Bermuda Triangle, and we had a lot of interesting experiences around it. And so this has always been a subject near and dear to my heart, see? And, because people were coming up missing like 50 foot away from you and stuff like that. I mean, all the time. I mean, it wasn't just an isolated incident, just like the deal in Chicago. So I mean, it is intriguing.
Yeah.
And I haven't really thought about it much lately, but I got a great guest on the 8th on that. And then I think we're going to take a 2-week hiatus while Joe's gone overseas to do something, and I have to go to Vegas.
Oh, nice.
Win money. Well, maybe I'll win money. Sometimes I do. Not very often. But we're coming right up to our first break, and we'll be back with Russ Breault, the Shroud Encounter. We'll be right back. Well, it's good to be back with you. I'm glad to have Russ Breault on. He has the Shroud Encounter, and he's just lectured all over. He's been doing this for 25 years on the Shroud of Turin. His presentation's The Mystery of the Shroud, a multimedia encounter. And Russ has spoken at Penn State, Duke, Auburn, West Point. He's been on the History Channel, Discovery Channel, CBS. And once again, he's the president and founder of Shroud of Turin Education Project. It's good to talk to you, Russ. I'm looking forward to this interview.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you.
And you're lucky enough to live in the Atlanta area, aren't you? Peachtree City, is it?
I do. Been here about 30 years.
Nice.
Well, I used to be there. I used to live there, and I enjoyed it very much. When I got out of the Army, I moved to Atlanta, and I liked it very much. But and Heidi Hollis is on with us. She's a Christian author herself.
Yes.
And,
love it.
Hey, Heidi, how are you?
Life is fantastic. I'm happy to have you on. You sound actually like a great guest, because sometimes Kevin gets these guests that will make me want to pull my hair out. So I'm happy to have you on.
Well,
you got to understand. got to understand, Russ. Heidi's a liberal, and I'm somewhat conservative, and
yeah, yeah, it gets interesting to say the least.
Well, she's always antagonizing.
Well, there's always two sides to every story, anyways.
Isn't that the truth? My goodness.
Well, I'm afraid you might have scared Megan Barth off. I might have to have her on instead of you that night.
Oh, boy. My goodness. Well, now, I'm curious about the topic. I mean, what got you involved in looking into the Shroud of Turin?
Well, I was a writer for the college newspaper a long time ago in 1980, and in 1978, a whole team of scientists went to Turin, Italy, to study a religious artifact, if you can imagine. Almost 40 scientists, and in June of 1980, a big article came out in National Geographic that just caught my attention, and so I asked if I could write some articles for the college newspaper, and they said go for it. And so by the time I did all my research, I was hooked. And so I've been involved ever since.
Oh, that's cool. I can understand that. If I had the opportunity, I think Kevin would do the same. He loves these types of things as well.
Well, I do, Russ. Actually, I wrote a book on Marian apparitions a few years ago, and I experienced some things. And Heidi's experienced all kinds of religious experience.
Yeah, Jesus encounters. Just one thing we agree upon, Jesus is for real.
Oh, that's for sure. But now, Russ, we have a facsimile of the Shroud of Turin in my church in Keller, Texas, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. Didn't you give a presentation there at one time? Or
I was there back in May of this year.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, it's really the only artifact I'm very familiar with. Not just the shroud and just sketchy terms. I mean, I'm sure you'll illuminate us on that. But is the tilma of Juan Diego at Basilica of Guadalupe? I had a friend, associate, who had friends from Sandia Labs that examined particles of that tilma, which is basically it's a cactus husk garment that's 500 years old and still in pristine condition. And there's no tracing, there's no pigment. The image of Mary on that tilma is miraculous. There's no way to make that without pigment. There's no way to do it, and it's been in church custody for 500 years. So these things exist, is all I'm saying from my limited perspective. But the shroud, I don't really know that much about, just in sketchy terms.
Well, I think what makes the shroud compelling for me is the fact that this is the only Christian artifact that's been analyzed to the extent that the shroud has. I mean, you have all these scientists, I would say most of whom thought that the shroud would be proven to be some kind of artwork of some kind. And they go over there and they have hands-on for 5 days, 120 hours, doing all kinds of analysis, X-radiography, spectroscopy, infrared thermography, photomicroscopy. Over 30,000 photographs were taken at different levels of magnification. Kodak, they donated $1 million worth of high-tech film.
Nice.
I mean, so this was a huge project. And 3 years analyzing the data, which was released in 1981, and their conclusion was that, we don't know what it is, but it's not the work of an artist, and the blood appears to be blood, and it's and so the plot certainly thickens, but consequent, to this scientific effort, the results of these scientists were published in 24 different peer-reviewed journal articles. I mean, I'm talking about major scientific journals. And so the science involved in the shroud is head and shoulders above anything else that we have in the realm of Christianity. And so that's what makes the shroud so compelling, is the amount of research and investigation that has gone into it.
Well, now,
fantastic.
I guess as just as a preliminary, what is the shroud's history as far as where it originated, and I guess who's had custody of it over the years? I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, you kind of have to break it up into two sections, really, and that you have the history in Western Europe, and then you have the history in Eastern Europe. And the history in Western Europe really goes from about 1353 to the current era, and then the history in Eastern Europe goes from the 6th century and then disappears in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade. And it was stolen by the French, and just lo and behold happens to show up in France 150 years later.
I see. So they could trace the history of it back to the 500 or 600 years, 500 years.
Yeah, I think we've got a solid history, dating back to around 525. And before that, we're not, we think it was probably just hidden away for several hundred years. Sure. And then, legend and folklore talks about it's called the Legend of Abgar, which is written up by the historian Eusebius. And, Abgar is the king of the city-state of Edessa. This is circa 1st century. And he's dying of leprosy, and he sends a messenger down to Jerusalem to find Jesus and ask him if he'd be willing to come to Edessa and bring healing to the king. Well, obviously Jesus has other plans, and so consequently, this mysterious cloth with a mysterious image on it makes its way to Edessa, along with the apostle Jude Thaddeus. And Abgar is healed of leprosy, and he becomes a believer. And so we think that's kind of where the beginning of the Shroud is right there in Edessa, which today would be in southern Turkey. And it's so I think the Shroud was kind of a conundrum for the Jews because for the Jews, this cloth, wrapped a corpse, was covered with blood. That makes it unclean, and yet, and someone's like, well, wait a minute, Jesus was dead, but now he's not. So is this thing clean or is it not clean? And so we don't know what, so I think that even though they treasured it, it really wasn't going to be a very good evangelization tool to reach the unbelieving Jews. So I think they were happy to send it off to the Gentiles who would probably figure out how to use it.
Wow.
Kind of problematic for them. I got it. Huh.
That's interesting. Were there ever any miracles noted to take place around the Shroud?
Well, you have Abgar, which was the first miracle, who was a king who was healed. You have during the early history, many of the people both in Edessa and then later on when it moved to Constantinople, attribute winning of battles and stuff to having the kind of the influence or protection of the Shroud, and it's. But I always tell people there are miracles of faith that happen every single day with the Shroud, and it's so I really do that and have experienced that over the 30 years I've been lecturing on it. I know that it has been a powerful influence to millions of people.
Has there been? I want to say that I watched a program that showed an artist's depiction of the Shroud hanging somewhere. I just can't recall where it was, but I want to say like there is actual historical artwork that showed where it traveled or something along those lines. I mean, does that ring a bell? I know I'd seen something on a program, but
well, yes. You see, in other words, all of your Byzantine icons of Jesus, which later became the Orthodox Church. So if you've ever been into an Orthodox church or an Eastern Rite Catholic church, you know that they're very image centric, and there are icon images for every feast day, every saint, everything. But all of the icons of Jesus, suddenly changed in the early 6th century. So, for instance, if you look at the catacomb walls or some other depictions of Jesus prior to the 6th century, depictions of Jesus are all over the board. You see a side view, you see him short hair, you see him clean shaven, but all of a sudden, with the discovery of what was then known as the true likeness. Now today we believe it's the same as the Shroud of Turin, but then it was known as the true likeness or the image of Edessa. All of a sudden, all of your Byzantine icons of Jesus changed to long hair, full beard, large hollow eyes, flattened nose, stylistically looking very similar to what we see on the Shroud and very similar to what we know today. In fact, the Byzantine icons of Jesus are iconic. You see them in the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, and which was formerly Constantinople. And so this is the Shroud is most likely the kind of progenitor of all of the icons of Jesus that followed.
Wow, I heard that Akiana, that child prodigy that painted a picture of Jesus, that the image on the Shroud of Turin was very, very accurate to what, very similar to what she had painted in her Prince of Peace. Is that true? Yeah, that she was like 8 years old and she painted this image of Christ. Oh, it's unbelievable. With
the single exception that her rendition has shorter hair than what we would normally, No, he still had long hair, but it was just a little shorter than what we see, which is proof that they have hair salons in heaven.
I love it.
It was true
Heidi? If it's called the Prince of Peace, I believe. And she painted it when she was like 8 years old, and she had visits to heaven. She even went missing for a certain amount of time, and she reported being taken up by angels to heaven, and then suddenly she reappeared, and she'd been painting these images of Jesus and angels, and
she lived in the United States, or
she lives over here near Chicago. She lives here in Illinois.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I think what she painted is very beautiful, and of course, if you saw the near death experience of the what's his name, Todd
Burpo.
Thank you, Burpo, the 4-year-old kid that died, and he looked at that picture and said, "That's what Jesus looked like." So it's kind of confirmed. Right. But then I've read other near-death experiences that people have encountered Jesus and his hair is longer, and of course you have the Divine Mercy image, which the hair is longer and very similar to the Shroud, and yet longer. So I don't want to place too much stock in one person's a view of Jesus, but it does. But her description and her painting certainly is corresponds very well with the Shroud.
Right. Yeah. Quite amazing stuff. My goodness. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
No, I don't mean to interrupt, honey, but we're getting close to the bottom of the hour break. I was going to say that maybe Russ could mention his website. And we'll pretty well go to break right after that.
Yeah, well, my main website is shroudencounter.com.
Oh, okay.
You can, I have a Facebook page also. If you just search for Shroud Encounter, you'll find my Facebook page as well.
Okay. Well, we just got a few seconds before that, Heidi. I didn't even want you to get.
Oh, that's all good. No, I'm checking out his website. Very nice site. Love it.
What's weird is I didn't know that you came in May. I mean, I go every Sunday, but I guess I didn't read the bulletin and they didn't mention it. I mean, I'm religiously there every Sunday. Oh, well, that just goes to show you how things work. So
you're saying you weren't paying attention to the announcements?
They never mentioned it. Well, we'll take our break. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Well, it's great to be back with Russ Breault and Heidi. And so basically, though, Russ, when they did all these varying tests on the Shroud, it had the same kind of finding as it did with the tilma, that there was no actual pigment or tracing or anything of that nature found on the Shroud?
Yeah, that is the most significant finding of the Shroud project, is that all the tests confirm that there is no visible trace of any kind of paint, ink, dye, pigmentation, or stain. There are no artistic substances on the cloth to account for the image. And in fact, in fact, the one of the most intriguing attributes of the Shroud image is that it affects only the top 1 to 2 microfibers of the linen, and that means not threads but fibers. Each thread is made up of about 200 fibers. So in other words, this image resides on less than 1% of a single thread. So if
completely superficial, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So when you look at the Shroud, the first thing you'll notice are a series of burns and patches from a fire in 1532. They're very, very prominent, and scorch marks. So the image kind of appears to lie between a set of parallel lines, and those are nothing more than burns and patches and scorch marks from that fire. And then it was doused with water, so you have a pattern of water stains, and then, of course there's a whole pattern of blood stains. Now, if you were to flip the cloth over, you would see all that. You'd see the burns, you see the water stains, you see the blood stains. But the one thing you would not see is the image of the man, because it is a purely superficial phenomenon. And so when you're the either or proposition with the Shroud is that it either is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus or it's not. And if it's not, well, then it must be the work of an artist. And if that's the case, well, then what kind of artistic process is this? That can be so superficial, leaving an image that is basically uniform in intensity, top to bottom, front to back. And I mean, because when you look at the Shroud, you're looking at an image of about a 5'10" crucified man, both the frontal image and the dorsal image. So you have the whole front of the man, you have the whole back image of the man, because this 14-foot long linen cloth was basically enveloped him lengthwise. And so this is, so when you compare it to art, it stands absolutely alone. There's nothing before it, there's nothing after it. And so it's just this singular, unique thing that really is either the greatest hoax ever perpetrated, or it's the most important artifact on the planet. It's one of the two.
Wasn't there the big question of religious forgery was a big thing way back when the Shroud was said to have come to light? Is that been the biggest hurdle to try to get some understanding of proving that it's the real deal because of the amount of forgeries that were out there of religious artifacts?
Well, the interesting thing is that there's been about 52 copies of the Shroud made, and every single one of them is an obvious copy. They're obviously made by paint and or other pigments and dyes. And in fact, most of these copies have actually been touched to the Shroud of Turin as a way of sanctifying it. And it's like having, for instance, if you had a baseball card with Babe Ruth on it, one was signed and the other one wasn't, which one would you rather have? And
right.
So by touching it to the Shroud itself, the copy becomes a relic in and of itself, and then usually a document is crafted by the cardinal, and it's signed, verifying that this cloth, that this copy has in fact touched the authentic burial shroud, but none of those copies would ever be seen as being anything but copies, and so So again, the Shroud stands unique, and it's and you're right. There certainly was, all kinds of things going on with various alleged relics, the bones of so and so, and of course, how do you know? And
right.
But certainly now one of the one of our biggest obstacles is the fact that the shroud was carbon dated in 1988, and they said it had a date range of 1260 to 1390. So, so according to them, it is medieval. But then we find out that they were supposed to cut 3 samples from 3 different locations on the cloth, but they didn't do that. What did they do? They cut 1 sample from the outside corner edge, exactly where it had been held and handled hundreds of times. And now there is reason to believe that that corner has been subjected to some kind of manipulation, some kind of medieval reweave, or some kind of repair. So now
repairing damages, yeah.
So now we don't even know what we dated, because they only cut 1 sample instead of 3. And so now the latest dating research came out of Padua University in Italy in 2013, and they were looking at samples of other linens of a known age, about a dozen different pieces of linen from the current era, 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old, all the way back to 5,000 years old, a piece of an Egyptian mummy cloth. And they assessed the rate of chemical and mechanical decay in these other linens, and then compared fibers from the shroud. And by comparison, they determined that the shroud had a date range of 280 BC to 220 AD, about a 500-year range, with first century right in the middle. So it's like, well, who's right and who's wrong? And so which always brings me back to the historical trail, because you see, I can prove definitively that the shroud was stolen from Constantinople in 1204. Now, 1204 is already older than the oldest carbon date of 1260, and it didn't just get there in 1204; it had been there for hundreds of years. So here's what I know. I know the carbon date is wrong. I just don't know how wrong. I can't necessarily prove it's first century, but I know that carbon date is wrong.
Right. Right. Wow. Well, no, I think that's I know. I remember when that first come up, but was there also something about pollens that they found Middle Eastern pollens on it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole pattern of pollens on the shroud, that pollen from plants that only grow in Israel and other plants that only grow in Turkey, that seems to corroborate the presumed historical trail. To wit, Avinoam Danin, who was the leading botanist in Israel, wrote 7 books on the flowers of Palestine, and he's Jewish. And his 8th book was called Botany of the Shroud, and he is absolutely certain, from the standpoint of a botanist, that cloth originated within a 20-kilometer radius of Jerusalem.
Well, I'd say that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Obviously, the shroud has a history, obviously, from at least 650 onwards. That's well documented. So it's certainly hundreds of years prior to the carbon dating they did at the edge. But to me, Russ, it's kind of, I don't mean to be tedious about it, but it seems to me that there is something, the miraculous factor in the tilma of Juan Diego, that has the same format of having no pigment or no tracing. And maybe that's just the way divine objects are manifested or something, because like I say, there's no better. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just saying I don't really know a whole lot about the tilma. I mean, I certainly know some, but I don't try to be an expert on that.
Oh no, I'm not saying I am one either. But I talked to people that were, and at Sandia Labs, you're not going to get a better testing lab, a physical testing lab in the world than that. And they put electron microscopes on it. There was no tracing, no pigment, no nothing. It was a superficial image similar to the shrouds. So right. I mean, both of them seem like certainly very miraculous objects, but I'm glad that they did the carbon dating later and the updates in 2013 and what have you, because everybody was throwing rocks at the idea of the shroud for a long time over that. The press they want to talk everything down, but October
fact, I think it was a Friday the 13th in October of 1988. Really? Was not a good day for the Shroud, let me tell you.
Wow!
I know.
But you know what's interesting is that St. Jude is very much involved in the story of Abgar, who. And the St. Jude took the Shroud to Edessa along with Abgar's messenger. And whenever you see an icon image of St. Jude, notice that on his chest is the face image of Jesus. That goes all the way back to the Abgar story. So St. Jude is very much involved in the Shroud story, and I just think it's funny that St. Jude is known as the patron saint of lost causes. And let me tell you, in October of '88, the Shroud was a lost cause, but I can tell you St. Jude has been on the case because it's not a lost cause anymore.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I sure am. And that's what it does. Of course, I feel fortunate to have experienced some very strange things in the church you were a presenter at in May. I mean, I have something happen every 6 months that's very kind of reassuring, and I guess God loves northeastern salesmen, I guess. Curmudgeon-y salesmen, and I'm not the only one that experiences that down there. That was a heck of a church, wasn't it? Didn't you think?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's great.
I get 20, Heidi. We get 20 frequently, 2,500 per service.
Wow. That's nice.
And, they have 4 masses on Sunday.
Well, you have a huge campus. I think I was in the gym where I presented. I wasn't even in the church.
Yeah, you were in the gym. Yeah, that's it's Heidi. They got a 7 o'clock, a 9 o'clock, an 11 o'clock, and a 4 o'clock mass, and they're all wall to wall. And
that's amazing.
Well, I'm kind of I've got, everybody's got bats in their belfry to some extent. I don't like crowd scenes and being elbow to elbow with people. I never could handle New Orleans Mardi Gras for that. And but at any rate, frequently I would sometimes, depends on when you hit mass, whether you get a seat or not. But a lot of times there's overflow into the outside the church itself and into the lobby in front of it. And I'm out there with the crying babies and the latecomers, because you always have an overflow, because I can't stand being armpit to armpit with somebody.
Right.
And no, it's a heck of a campus, Heidi. It's probably 6 acres, and it's just beautiful, beautiful place. But it does have a replica of the Shroud on it. That's, of course, what I've seen over these many years. But I don't know. I guess it just tickles me because, Russ, all these naysayers and all that stuff, they think they know everything, and if they can't explain it, then it can't exist. They can't. Their egos are so inflated they can't grasp the fact that there's some knowledge they just don't have, and it just tickles me that you've been able to find updated results. It really is.
Yeah, I think the Shroud is a marvelous mystery, and I have a feeling it's always going to be a mystery.
Yeah,
and that's just fine with me. I tell people, I have this presentation I do called 7 Secrets of the Sacred Shroud, and one of the secrets in there is just like if we were to let's say the Shroud of Turin didn't exist, and they were excavating in Jerusalem somewhere, and they found St. Peter's tomb, and in St. Peter's tomb was this linen shroud that they realized was the Shroud of Jesus, and they opened it. So in other words, it was not removed from its archaeological context. It was found right there in Jerusalem, and they opened it up. Now, just pause right there. You see, all of the deep things of God are all mysteries. Everything. In other words, I ask people, can anyone explain how someone feeds 5,000 people with a boy's lunch? How does someone calm a storm with a simple command? You know, how does someone heal someone who's been a paralytic all of his life? I mean, we call them miracles, but really they're all mysteries. All the deep things of God are all mysteries. So wouldn't it make sense that the burial shroud of Jesus, if we were just to find it, in Jerusalem today, that when we opened it up, we wouldn't be able to figure it out. It would be a mystery, because this cloth would be the cloth that not only wrapped his crucified body, but more importantly, wrapped his resurrection body. And I'm not saying, and you see, the fact that the shroud remains a mystery is a huge support for its authenticity. Because I tell people all the time, if the shroud was an obvious work of art, we would have figured that out 100 years ago. All you take is a magnifying glass. Yep, there's the paint. Let's go. I mean, it's,
right.
I think this is a huge proof point for its authenticity.
We have a question out of the chat room by Gino, who's asking, with the date of 1260, could the shroud be an image potentially of a Knight Templar?
There are theories that allege that the shroud is the image of Jacques de Molay, which was one of the Templars that was burned at the stake in 1307. I'm sorry, 1314. The Templars were taken down on again. Friday the 13th on October in 1307, 15,000 of them were rounded up in France. They were all put in prison. About half of them were killed, and then the two leaders of the Templars, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charnay, were in prison for 7 years, and then they were finally burned at the stake in 1314. Well, there are some people that would say that that allege, there's a theory out there that this is the image of Jacques de Molay. Well, the only problem with that is that the image that's on the shroud is an image of a man who's dead. So it doesn't seem likely that it's the image of Jacques de Molay, who we know was burned at the stake. And so I mean, clearly we have an image on the shroud of a man who was crucified. Jacques de Molay was not crucified,
right?
The fact that we have a side wound with a separation of blood and blood serum indicates that this is post-mortem blood flow, or blood that flowed after death, and so we feel pretty certain. And plus, we have the evidence also on the body of rigor mortis, which of course is not going to occur unless you're dead, and
right.
So there's no way that this could also be the shroud of Jacques de Molay. It's and so it just doesn't fit what we know about the history.
Well, no, but it would also it had a 700-year history before he died. I mean,
well, exactly. So there's always people that there are people are trying to figure out. Well, let's say the carbon date is right. Well, then how could this shroud have originated in that time frame of the 12 or 1300s? And so you have people that are accepting of the carbon date, and so now they're having to figure out who could have done it. But again, as you said, I can definitively prove that the shroud was stolen from Constantinople in 1204, and that same cloth arrived in Constantinople in 944. So obviously we've got a problem here with the shroud having originated anywhere near the time of the alleged carbon date.
Gotcha. Now, did you say that blood was tested?
That the blood on the shroud is tested. It is AB blood type. It is human blood. It is very degraded, however, and it's very old blood. We've even done DNA analysis in 1995 and determined that it is human male DNA, but again, very, very degraded. We couldn't really tell much more than that. And it's and right now, although people ask me, what are some further tests that could be done on the shroud, I'd like to see a lot more DNA done on it. But that is fraught with problems because anyone who's ever touched the shroud, their DNA is on the shroud, and
they're afraid of cloning. Have you heard of that rumor?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's why the church has not authorized any additional DNAs, because they are afraid of it's the law of unintended consequences, and it's we got the DNA, and then someone comes along and steals it. I mean, there's got to be at least a dozen books written about someone stealing blood from the shroud and cloning Jesus.
Yeah, that's all we need. Goodness. Not good at all.
No. Well, not a good idea.
I know, but that is remarkable. But then, obviously, the idea with Middle Eastern pollens being, on the shroud, that would preclude forgeries and
not only is there pollen, but there's also all over the shroud are microscopic particles of limestone, but a very specific kind of limestone, travertine aragonite limestone, microscopic particles, and this is the same exact limestone that is common to the tombs and hills around Jerusalem. And it's
really?
And so there's also particles of calcite. Now, calcite is the common ingredient in road dirt. Now, this calcite was only found on 2 locations, on the feet and on the knees. And it's like, well, what would you expect from someone who walked in sandals and fell under the weight of the cross? And so, and so you have these very this microscopic data that, of course, would not even entered into the mind of some medieval forger.
No, these monkeys would have never known anything like that.
What of there's a question, or the comment posed about Peter being crucified upside down around the same time frame as Jesus. So has that also been speculated as being potentially him?
I would say that we know that Peter was crucified upside down. Well, it was the same time frame, I guess, if you say first century, because Peter was crucified probably around 60 or 70 A.D. But again, here's the problem with this is that let's say it is the Shroud of Peter. All you'd have are blood stains, smudges, and stains of decomposition with the body decomposed through the cloth. Yeah. With the shroud, we have an inexplicable image that is not the result of direct contact with a corpse. You see, the direct contact with the corpse only explains the blood. It does not explain the image. Something else is at work with the cause of this image, because it is completely superficial. It is uniform in intensity, top to bottom, front to back. It contains distance information, which means that you can render a 3D likeness based on the information in the shroud.
Wow.
It is a photo negative image, which means for some reason it looks tremendously clearer in a photo negative than it does on the cloth itself. And so you have all these unique anomalies related to the shroud that literally preclude it being a image made from direct contact with a corpse. And so that leaves people speculating, well, then could it be the result of the resurrection? And of course, I'm all in for that. In fact, I think that the likely cause of the image is probably light. Because
I've heard that speculated before. Yes.
Because when you think about it, everything about the shroud is perfectly consistent with the gospel account regarding all of the wounds that Jesus sustained: crown of thorns, singular mockery for the man who claimed to be king of the Jews, scourging all over the body. Why was he so badly scourged? Because Pontius Pilate didn't think he was guilty of a crime worthy of capital punishment. He didn't want to kill him. And the first thing he did, he sent him to King Herod. Herod sent him back, and then he tried to trade Barabbas, and that didn't work. And so finally he has him scourged to within an inch of his life, thinking that when that bloodied hulk of a man came walking back into the courtyard, that maybe they'd say, well, okay, I guess we don't have to kill him. So now we have a man who's brutally scourged, crown of thorns, wound in the side, and the legs are not broken. Everything consistent with what we know happened to Jesus. And
well, I tell you what, I don't mean to interject, guys. We're coming to our top of the hour break.
Okay.
Well, it's great to be back with Russ, and once again, mention your website again, Russ. Tell these
you can go to shroudencounter.com, and you can also search for Shroud Encounter on Facebook and find my Facebook page. And if you find my Facebook page, you should like me.
Okay. I like you already. Is that count? I have a thought. It's something you mentioned. You're like, well, you can see all the dimensions of, the body that was in the shroud. Have you guys ever speculated on the thought of 3D printing, like the full body, like to have it there and to see what Christ may have appeared like, to have next to you?
Yeah, that's actually an intriguing thought. I know that we've done 3D rendering and other
I want credit for the idea. Just Heidi Hollis, Hollis, 3D print Christ. It would be cool.
That would be intriguing.
You have all the dimensions, and wow, I mean, just don't make bars of soap out of it. I hate when there's bars of soap of things. It's just so weird. But, I mean, I think it would be cool. I mean, wow. Yeah. 5'10", that's the same size as Michael Jackson. But it would be just so wild to be, looking into potentially the face of Christ and what his presence was like as a human being.
Actually, Heidi, I think for that era, that was pretty tall.
5'10"? Yeah, probably. Yeah.
It was probably a little on the tall side, although they've done excavations at Masada, and about 10 or so male skeletons, and they average range from 5'6" to 6 feet. So it doesn't seem to be that far out of the norm.
Well, I was just going by the Spanish conquistadors at St. Augustine were like.
Yeah, what's interesting, I got to tell you a story on that, because a lot of people say that, it seems like he's really, really tall. But, I went to a lecture one time, it was a retired Army colonel, and he had been stationed in South Korea when he was in the Army. He retires, he goes back to school, and he gets an academic visa to go to North Korea. And the one thing he noticed in his talk was that the average North Korean is about 4 to 6 inches shorter than the South Korean. And it's the same culture. And so what is the difference? It's all about nutrition. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Kim Jong-il is making them ill.
Yeah.
Oh, they're starving bunch. They're starving bunch.
But isn't that interesting? That the fact that you have the same culture and they're 4 to 6 inches shorter, and it's all has to do with diet. So I can believe that.
Stunted their growth. Well, I'm curious. You said that other bodies have been excavated from around the same time period, so they had shrouds on them as well. Do you compare and say, look at the big difference here? There's no impression at all of their faces on these old shrouds. I mean,
there are no images on them except for just smudges of decomposition. The few shrouds, and some of them are wool, some of them are just plain flax linen. The shroud is a very distinctive 3-to-1 herringbone patterned weave. Which was very expensive at the time, doable in first century, yet very expensive, and also hence very, very rare. And it's interesting what the scripture says. Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, purchased a fine linen cloth. And so everything about the Shroud of Turin would indicate that this is one of the most expensive fabrics you could buy at the time, simply because of the way that it was woven. Now, however, most often we do not find linen shrouds or Jewish linen shrouds, because the Jews, for the most part, use what's called ossuaries. This is a bone box. Oh. So, for instance, in a normal funeral, the body would be placed in a tomb, and it would be wrapped in a burial shroud, and then they go back into that tomb a year or more later, and the body would be decomposed. They take those bones, put them into a box, about a limestone box, about the size of an ice cooler, and they would etch on the outside of it whose bones these belong to. And so, and then they would stack these boxes up inside the tomb, so then you could have multiple people buried in the same tomb. But they would take the shroud and dispose of it, probably burn it. And so, which is why we almost never find any Jewish burial shrouds. We find lots of Egyptian burial shrouds, but almost never do we find a Jewish burial shroud.
In New Orleans, don't they kind of stack the bodies on like that, and they kind of cook inside of the cement blocks they put their loved ones in, and then they throw another body in? I mean, it's just, I don't know, the heat down there.
A mausoleum, or what are they called? Or
kind of, sort of.
It's like a condominium.
Yeah. Honestly, they keep stacking them, and they just kind of go to dust, and they throw somebody else there a few years later, and I don't know. Yeah, really different.
There's a term for what it's called, but I don't recall it.
Yeah, it escapes me, but I know it's haunted. That's all I know.
But I mean, a family would have a 6-occupant mausoleum, or whatever they call it.
And they just melt and go to dust, and they throw grandma on there too, and I don't know, it's just crazy.
Well, but I mean, I get it. Rain down there too. I mean, rain caskets go floating down the road and stuff like
that's
that.
Gross.
I mean, it's not just a wonderful place, but it's got its peculiarities. But the funny thing about it, I mean, I'm glad we're having this show on the shroud, but someday we're going to have a show just on the burial industry and the cons and that. But
oh my.
We'll leave that for a more.
That'll be a sinister show. This is a holy program tonight.
That's right. I mean, we won't muddy up the program with those things.
Yeah.
But now, Russ, wasn't Hitler chasing around after the shroud at one time?
Yes, he was. I do a whole lecture on that. It's called the Day the Shroud Foiled Hitler. It deals with the 7 years that the shroud was taken out of Turin to keep it away from him. And in 1938, Hitler visited. It was in April of '38. Hitler visited Italy to meet with Mussolini, and one of the cities he visited was Turin. And his henchmen were asking a lot of questions about this mysterious relic that at that time belonged to the king. And so the king was a little concerned about why Hitler was so interested in his relic. And so when Hitler invaded Poland a year later, in September 1st of 1939, the King of Italy made plans then to secretly move it out of Turin to a monastery south of Rome, about 150 miles south of Rome, a monastery called Montevergine, and it was hidden inside an altar that was in a choir chapel there at the monastery, and sure enough, in 1943, the Nazis came looking for the shroud in Turin, because it seems like maybe the wages of war or the winds of war were shifting against the Führer, and so he needed more power, and so he must have said, "Go find the shroud," and so at any rate, they came looking for it in Turin and found it wasn't there, and then but then the Nazis came looking for it came in September of '43. They marched up the hill to that monastery under cover of darkness, banged on the door, and they said that they were looking for spies. Well, we think they were looking for something else. And so the abbot of the monastery ordered all of the monks down into that choir chapel. None of whom knew that the shroud was there. Only the abbot and one other priest knew that the shroud was secretly encased in that altar. And so he was hoping that if that when the Nazis finally got to the chapel, that maybe they'd leave him alone. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. As soon as the Nazis got to that choir chapel, they saw all the monks gathered in prayer, and one of the Nazis said, "Don't bother the monks, let them pray." And so they walked away. With the shroud was only 20 feet away, but they walked away empty-handed, not finding the shroud nor finding any spies. And so it's just a very intriguing chapter of shroud history.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, actually, the priest did mention that story at the church. He just didn't mention he heard it at your lecture.
So he ripped you off.
That's okay. I think it's a great story, and then I think the most important thing about the shroud is the message behind it. Because at the end of the day, we can never prove the shroud absolutely to be the shroud of Jesus, because we don't have the DNA of Jesus to match it up with something we might extract from the shroud, which is why we can never prove it absolutely. I mean, we can certainly prove what it's not, and it's but I have a feeling that this is why the shroud will always be a mystery. You see, because I don't think the shroud was ever meant to be a substitute for faith. The old expression that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Amen.
I think the shroud takes you right up to the water's edge, but it's still going to take an act of faith to drink from that living water.
Just leave it to Kevin to kick them in. They'll get in there.
So that's what I think it's all about. I think it's all about a message to the doubting Thomases of the world. Doubting Thomas had every reason to believe. As he wasn't there the first night that Jesus appeared in the upper room to all the apostles. We don't know where Thomas was. And so you can imagine when Thomas finally does come back, that everyone ran up to him saying, "Thomas, it's true. He was here. He is alive. We touched him. We broke bread. He talked about the kingdom. It was amazing." Where were you? And it's, and here Thomas, despite the testimony of all of his best friends, refuses to believe. And then, of course, a week later, Jesus appears again in the upper room. This time, Thomas is there, and the first person Jesus speaks to is Thomas. And he says, "Thomas, come here." And you can imagine Thomas falling at Jesus' feet. And Jesus quotes Thomas's own words back to him. He says, "Thrust your hand into my side and place your fingers into my nail wound, and be not faithless, but believe." Now, at this point, Thomas, forever known as Doubting Thomas, now makes the strongest profession of faith in the entire New Testament. He says, "My Lord and my God." But he couldn't do it, wouldn't do it, was unable to do it until he was face to face with the resurrected Christ. You see, that to me is the message of the shroud. I've been wondering all my life, why God has preserved it. Why has God revealed it through science over the course of the 20th century? And here we are in the 21st century, and we communicate more with images than we do with words. And it makes me wonder whether this was preserved for this time in human history. And So I think, I think it's very...
It's very telling. Well, I have to say, one of my books
now, Heidi, I don't mean to interject. I know.
Heidi,
I don't mean to interject, but we're coming up to our last break. And
it's coming. But I just want to say real quick, I have a chapter called... We're going. Never mind.
It's great having Russ and Heidi on for this show. Russ, go ahead and mention any upcoming events you might have, or lectures, or...
I'm going to be in the Philadelphia area in August, and I'm going to be in Massachusetts in December. This is kind of I get very busy, probably starting around mid-February, and that tour is building right now, and But I would just invite people to go to the website shroudencounter.com, and it's and just kind of explore that site. And if anyone's interested in having me out to their parish, just contact me through the website, and I'll tell you, and I'll be able to send you some information about what I do and what's involved.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a question for you, and something I want to say real quick just before the break. You talked about how people communicate more through images now, and that was something I really stressed in a couple of my books. One I called Picture Prayers, and praying with intention and focused on an image in mind versus words. I just think, a picture is 1,000 words, truly is, and that's actually how I personally pray. So I just thought that was interesting that you're saying that. It's like, yeah, that's true. People do communicate more through images now. But one question I had for you in regards to people have mysterious instances happening all the time, all over the world, and that's something that this show highlights oftentimes. And I'm curious if you've ever come across another potential image, somebody passed away and left an image or a mark that could maybe be compared to the Shroud of Turin, how it got its impression, or is this something that you may ambition to do one day?
There have been things like that tend to be more like smudges and shadows and things like that, but nothing that seems to have the clarity that we see in the Shroud image, and so it would so really yes, we found some things that are interesting, but again not really comparable.
Ah, that's interesting. So smudges, but not whole impressions. Fascinating.
No.
Goodness, and you believe it was done by light? You said.
If you looked at the tilma, you'd find that similar.
Well, when it comes to light, what's real interesting is that in 2011, researchers with the ENEA, this is the Italian Agency for New Technologies, they have been experimenting for several years with high energy pulse lasers. These are ultraviolet excimer lasers, and they determined that a 40 nanosecond burst on this UV laser against a control sample of linen achieves the very same depth and coloration as we see on the Shroud. And I think that's really intriguing. A 40 nanosecond, a nanosecond is a billionth of a second. So this is a 40 nanosecond. Yeah. You can't blink your eyes that fast. And which I think is really intriguing, because one of the best descriptions of what happened to Jesus in the tomb comes from the Apostle Paul, who writes in 1 Corinthians 15, and he says this: "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye." And I'm saying, wait a minute, we're going to be changed. You see, he's not even talking about Jesus here. He's talking about you and me. He's talking about a future event. And so, but he talks about a flash in the twinkling of an eye. Now, this is exactly what happened to Jesus in the tomb, because Jesus is called the first fruits of the resurrection. If he's the first fruits, then that means we are the rest of the fruit that comes later at the end of the age. And so in saying to myself, a flash, maybe a 40 nanosecond flash, I mean, that's kind of cool.
That is. Wow.
It is.
Had you ever heard of some of the research that was done in regards to like the bleeding statues with the blood coming out of the eyes of Jesus?
Tears?
And the tears. And I watched a program where they tested the blood, and it turned out to be woman's blood. And they're like, well, if Jesus was immaculately conceived, this would kind of play into that. But you mentioned that the blood that was that you guys tested, it was male DNA. So that's fascinating. Had you ever looked into some of that and looked at some of the potential, I don't know, likenesses that this phenomena has?
No, because I just stick with the Shroud because of all the science that's been done on it. I really try to stick with that, and it's I guess the other thing I'm been interested in lately is exploring all these near-death experiences, and which have been quite intriguing, and it's so I've been doing some research in that area, because there's been thousands and thousands of them over the years.
Oh, you've got to read my book. Jesus is no joke. I'd met Jesus 4 different times in that book.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
I will pick it up.
Yeah, and it was number 1 on Amazon for 8 months in its category. So, in the near-death experience.
What's the name of it again?
Jesus is no joke. Got to check it out. Oh, and you got to check out Kevin's. I'm sorry, but his book is only one of 2 Marian apparitions. I mean, fascinating collection.
Marian apparitions. It's called Marian apparitions are real, and it's one of only the 2 or 3 survey books in the history of the world. But it's thankfully I've had some experiences that have bolstered my faith, and I don't know. I feel really good about it. Now, but I think people do need tangible evidence. I think they do. Yes, I know you should believe without having to see all the time, but I mean, people need something substantive that all the goatee-stroking professors out there can't throw rocks at. And I think the Shroud and the Tilma and some other things, Eucharistic miracles and other near-death experiences, all these things in cumulative form are reassuring, and certainly are not someone's imagination by any means.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things I tell my evangelical friends when they say, well, God wouldn't do it that way because the Scripture says, that blessed are those who believe and have not seen. And I say to them, yes, that's true. Blessed are those who can believe and have not seen. But remember, Jesus did not condemn Thomas for his unbelief. And so Thomas represents an element of humanity, let's say, that just needs a little push in the right direction. And that's what I think the Shroud is all about.
Well, he performed miracles for the same reason. It wasn't just to do parlor tricks. He did it so that people would believe.
Well, it's interesting in Acts chapter 1 verse 3. It says this, talking about Jesus: after his suffering, he showed himself to be alive through many convincing proofs. Now, most of those proofs were probably post-resurrection appearances, but the first proof was the linen cloth lying there that caused John to believe that he had risen. So the linen shroud lying there in the tomb was the first proof that Jesus had risen from the dead. Now, to me, why is it a stretch to believe that first proof was not gathered and held and protected and passed down from one generation to the next, and it's in Turin, Italy right now? I don't think that's a stretch.
Exactly. I don't think it is at all. Well, Russ, it's been great having you, Russ, and we'll send you a link to the show, for utilize any way you like. And
well, wonderful.
Thank you. Having you very much.
Yeah, it's absolute pleasure chatting with you.
All right, and my pleasure as well.
Okay, sir. Well, you have a good evening out there in Georgia, and we'll talk about the couple coming events, and we'll keep in touch.
All right. Thanks so much.
Yes. You take care.
Good night.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Well, Heidi, that was a pretty good show, I thought. A lot of intriguing information on it.
Honestly.
Well, I'm just tickled. I'm just tickled that all these, like I said, these goatee-stroking professors that look down their snoots at you like they know everything. They really know nothing, and it tickles me. But really, that Tilma has the same kind of miraculous features to it. It's actually more colorful than the Shroud and more vivid. You can see it right on.
I took a look at it. It's pretty fascinating. 16th century.
It is.
Hey, Kevin,
now,
Heidi.
There is a little.
Kevin, Heidi, I just really want to thank you. I really enjoyed the interview. So.
Me too,
Same
Russ.
here.
Me too,
Thank
Russ.
you. Yes.
All right. Well, take care.
Thank you very much.
You too.
I'm going to go to bed now.
Take care.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. But yes, Heidi, now there was on the very bottom of her feet, there was some medieval idiot that added a cherub, but that's not part of the original garment. That's not part of the original garment. Yeah. But so next week, like I say, for the folks listening, we will have Paul Eno, and he's got a new book coming out. It's just coming out, and he's also got all kinds of the latest scuttlebutt from New England, which is also maybe not as exotic as Chicago, but it's pretty close. A lot of stuff goes on in New England. The ghosts are here. And actually, I've been sending you stuff about New York, of course.
Yeah.
And they have an awful lot of haunted restaurants and haunted inns and.
Yes. And pretty wild.
Mostly beautiful trails. But it's got its own little form of exotica there. And I don't know. One of these days, I'll escape Texas and go back home. But at any rate, good night, folks. We had a good time talking to you.
Yeah, good night, everybody.